Hi, I'm Mrs. Taylor with Mrs. Taylor Sewing School, and this video is a supplement to my complete course for beginners. Now, if you are a student enrolled in this course, you know that this video is a reminder, refresher, reference video for you when you are cutting out your patterns, preparing your patterns, and preparing your fabric to be cut. And if you are not enrolled in my course, if you live in the Temple, Texas area, you can visit my website at templesewing.weebly.com. We would love to have you. So when you are watching this video, I highly recommend that you have a notebook, pencil, and your pattern instruction guide next to you for the pattern that we are sewing in class. Or your pattern that you will be working with, at least to have as a reference when I go over this and refer to it. Then you also have a visual next to you that is more tangible than what you see in the video. So we're going to start with this instruction sheet because this is where we start for our pattern preparation. As you know that we've gone over the information on here, our line drawings that show us all the looks included in this. And then right over here is what we're going to be looking at. You can see that I've highlighted several of the pieces. You might remember from class, this is what I recommend you do when you are preparing to cut out your pattern. Before you ever get your pieces cut out, you need to figure out which look you're doing, what size you're going to need or sizes that you're going to need. And then you're going to take your highlighter and you're going to highlight each piece that you need. Highlight it in the list and then also highlight it in the picture. This makes it so much easier for just a really quick reference back. You don't have to do all the research and all the looking up all over again. You can just quickly refer to this at a glance while you're preparing your patterns, and you can keep this out of the way up on your corkboard or whatever you have available. So now that I have highlighted these portions, I'm going to show you that I have highlighted other key bits of information that I might need to refer to. And in our cutting layout, I have again highlighted the portions that I need to refer to. So I have highlighted the look that I'm doing. I'm doing dress C for this one. And I have highlighted the diagram that I'm going to be using, which is for the 45-inch fabric, not the 60-inch. I'm doing this in a muslin first, a cotton muslin, which is the 45-inch bolt. And so I will need to use this diagram for this particular dress. I've also highlighted the pieces that I need and the interfacing, and then there is the option for contrasting sides and back for this pattern. Now the pattern that we are sewing in this particular class, and remember your class might be sewing a different project, is a Simplicity pattern number 1586. Some of you in the class are doing this pattern. Other classes are doing other projects. So just for your information, this is the pattern that I will be referring to and demonstrating. However, these techniques and the information I'm going to be giving you is not specific to this pattern necessarily. And it should be universal to any of the patterns that you're going to be preparing, pinning, cutting, and marking. So now that you've got it highlighted, you know what you're cutting, you make sure that you know what size you are. Refer to your size chart on the back. Make sure you have a size for your bust, your waist, and your hip line if you are doing a dress. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside so that I can easily refer to it. Have it in a nice convenient area. And then we are going to prepare the pattern. Now, I've already separated the pieces, cut them out, and I've pressed them already. It would just take way too long to demonstrate this on the video. But simple stuff. If you've taken my class, you already know how to do this. We've definitely gone over that. So I have cut out the pieces. You can see it's not perfect. It's not even beautiful. It is not on the line or through any of the lines. It is just cut out enough to get off the excess paper and to separate these pieces from each other. And make sure that you are only cutting out the pieces that you're going to need for your sizes, and for the looks that you've chosen from your pattern, if your pattern has multiple options for multiple looks. So I am now going to show you how we prepare our multi-size pattern before we lay it out to cut it. If you are in my class, you have already heard this information, but again, it's a nice refresher. So I'm going to be using a permanent marker, nice bright mauve permanent marker, just so it's easier for you to see on the video. But you don't have to use a marker. You can use a pen, you can use a pencil is what I would recommend until you get used to working with it. Whichever writing utensil you feel comfortable with. Okay, so as you can see on the multi-size pattern, the multiple different lines for all those different sizes. Now on a simplicity pattern like this, generally they have all solid lines. Whereas when you're working with a Butterick or McCall's, generally speaking, they have different dashes symbolizing each different size. Makes it much easier to follow. So this next step I will be demonstrating is very important for differentiating the size that you need to follow. If it is all solid lines, all the lines look the same, they kind of blend together, it's going to be a little difficult to follow when you're cutting it out. So have something like I have this cardboard underneath my pattern as I'm preparing it. Don't write straight onto your fabric. You can see I have my fabric all laid out underneath here, but I'm protecting my fabric with the cardboard as I'm preparing this pattern. So I need a size, let's see, I'm going to refer again to the size chart because it's always good to double check. Yes, that's right. I need a size 22 for the bust. And remember, this is not the size of garment that you would go and purchase in the store. This is just the size that is for the standard body measurement on your pattern. So I need a size 22 on here. So I am going to take my marker and I am going to trace that size 22 line. So it is very obvious for me when I get this pinned out on my fabric and I'm going to cut it out, I know exactly which line I need to follow. So I'm just going to trace this all the way down, and actually I'm going to stop about halfway on this line and just give it some reference points around the corner. You of course can trace all the way down the line, but I just want to save some time. I just need a little reminder every now and then down the line, especially going around corners, which line is mine. So if I follow it around down here, okay, now I'm getting down to the waistline. Up here at the bust, the shoulders and neck, I'm a 22, but down here at the waist, I'm a different size. So I find the marking for my waistline, which is shown here. There's a dash and it says waistline, so that's how I know where it is. By the time I get down to this mark, I need to be a different size. So I'm going to find that size. There it is. And I need to mark that size right across from that waistline. So I know that I need to get out to that line by the time I get down to that point. So if I'm up here, I'm following that 22, I'm going to be coming around, and at this point I am coming around the bust area. And take into consideration your own body. You know your body. I know that my waist is high. I have a very short torso. I've got a high waist. So for me, coming right under the bust is when I have to start coming out for the waistline. There's not much in between where I would stay that bust size before coming out for the waist. So I am going to take it from, now you can get out your measuring tape, of course, and you can measure about where you need to come out for that waistline. But otherwise, just get a pretty general idea of how far up you're going to need it. So I'm going to start right about here. So I'm going to mark that at a 22 for the bust, and then I know I need to, by this point, I need to make it out to the waistline. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can wing it and just very gradually sketch it out, but something I really like to do is use my very formed curve ruler. Now, this is something I got from a professional supplier. It's by no means necessary for accomplishing the right fit with a multi-size pattern. This is a styling design ruler. It's also known as a French curve. This is something that is very versatile. It's got a nice see-through straight edge here, as well as your hip curve, armhole curve, and French curve on it. This I picked up at Joann Fabrics. It wasn't very expensive, and I know there are other fabric stores that carry them as well. There are other options as well as this one. So check it out. Very versatile, very useful, especially if you're going to need to customize a lot of patterns to fit your particular figure. So I'm going to be using this ruler. It's my favorite. It has just a really nice gradual curve on it. Just gives it a really nice line to it. And I don't need a whole lot of curve on here. I'm just going to be mimicking the natural curve that pattern is already taking when it slowly, softly scoops out from bust to waist. So I'm just going to mimic that curve, and I'm going to bring it from the point I marked up here down to where I said it needs to meet for that waistline. There it is. I think I really like that line there. It's a nice little curve, and I'm just going to make it nice and soft, and there it is. And as I'm cutting it out, it's going to look a little bit sharp when you draw it, but when you're cutting it out, make sure that it's not a really drastic, sharp corner that you're taking when those lines meet. You're just going to take your scissors and you're just going to softly curve that edge, so it's all going to blend nicely together. And then, of course, when you're stitching it, that's going to be, again, that nice smooth line. So, as you can see here, I have a really, well, let's see, I have a really nice transition now from the bust, and then it's coming down to the waist. And it's just going to be a nice smooth curve out to that new waistline. Now, further down, I have, again, a new measurement for my hip line. And this is going to be common for a lot of you. You're going to have different measurement for bust, different for waist, different for hip. It's very normal. Don't let it stress you out. Don't reach for the carrots yet, unless you like carrots. So down here is where I need to meet for my hip line. You can kind of see from the waistline where it's curved out to the waist, and then it starts to drop down straight. And you can also see it's about probably 8 or 9 inches generally, depending on how long or short your torso is, from your waistline down to your hip. So you can kind of judge from there, about 8 or 9 inches from that waistline is about your hip area. So I'm going to take it from there, and I'm just going to check the chart again just to make sure I'm getting the right line. And there it is. Okay, so now I need to mark where my hip is. And I'm going to double check on here which line I need. There it is. Okay, so by the time I get down to my hip, I need to be this size. Okay, and then just like last time, it's just going to be a nice, smooth, gradual in. And this line is going to be even smoother, even more gradual, because it's got such a long way to go. Now, matching hip line to waistline for a dress, depending on how snugly it's going to fit, is not quite as crucial as matching that bust to waistline. Because most dresses are just going to kind of hang or flare out when it gets down to that hip area, if that makes sense. So I think I really like that curve there. I'm just going to mark this really quick. There it is. And now I will show you. Here we go. So now you can see that we've got this really nice curve that's coming from our bust measurement out to our waistline. It's coming down through the hip, and then it's going to just hug in really nicely. And again, while I am cutting and then while I'm sewing, I'm going to round these off even more. It's just going to be a very natural little curve there. So you're going to do this on all of your patterns and mark as much of the line as you need to keep from getting confused as to where the line is, especially when you get to pieces like this. You can see down at the shoulder where those lines are getting very convoluted. They're all blending together. You're not sure which one's going which way. So find a good reference point, like the lines that came before it. Rule it out, basically. So I know this line over here is going this way, so that means this line over here must be going this way. So there's my line. I'm going to trace it out. There it is. Now I know it's going that direction. I'm going to find it again over here. There it is. And it's going that direction. Okay, so now I have my lines. Now I'm going to move some of this stuff over. Also, another reference tool for you, without bringing up this video every time. On your patterns, you're going to have a little square on there. When you're cutting out your patterns, you're going to see it. It's this one's from Simplicity, so it's Simplicity's multi-size patterns, the easy way to fit your pattern. And it pretty much goes over just exactly what I showed you. It shows that you can have a different measurement for bust, waist, and hips. And then it shows how you're going to blend that line. So it shows going from the bust line and then coming out across the lines that are already there for the cutting line, making yourself new cutting lines for a customized pattern that is customized for your body. And that's one of the best things about sewing your own clothes. You can customize it for your body and get a great fit so that no matter what you're wearing, you're always going to look good. Very important. Because I don't know about you, but I don't have time or money to tailor every bit of clothing that I buy in the store, because the designers of ready-to-wear clothing just cannot design a garment for every single body type. It's just not possible. So they do the best they can, but if you sew your own clothes, guaranteed your clothes are going to be sewn for you and you alone. Wonderful to know. Okay, so we're going to get this cleared off, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to pin this on our fabric. Now you're going to want, if you're following along at home, you're going to want your pins. This wrist pin cushion comes in very handy. I don't have to have a space on the table, since the table is going to be pretty full of patterns and fabric. I don't have to have a space to lay my pin cushion. I have to worry about those getting in the way or snagging anything. Now I'm not going to mark my other pattern pieces right now, just for the sake of time and for the sake of this video. I will go back through and do that later when I cut out the rest of my pattern pieces. But for now, it's important to just give you a good demonstration of most of these pattern pieces so that you have a good reference tool. So here's my fabric. Again, it's the 45-inch fabric. And we'll just pretend that it's already been pre-washed and pre-shrunk and is now laid out on the table. I've got my selvages nice and lined up. They're all even. And then I've smoothed it out so that I have this nice fold at the end. I've pressed out any stubborn wrinkles that might disturb our cutting lines. And it is ready to go. I have the edge lined up with the edge of this table here, so I've got the maximum amount of space to utilize. Now I'm going to refer back to my cutting layout that we have on our instruction sheet here, and I'm going to go to just that first one because it has the most pieces. it's going to be the most crucial that I get all of these pieces in here. The fewer pieces left over, it'll be easier to fit those on afterwards. So it's very important, as you might remember from the class, very important to follow your cutting layout until you get a lot more comfortable with how much yardage you really need for your garment, how to lay it out the correct way so that it's being cut out the right way. You've got all the pieces going the right direction that you're going to need. And then also for minimizing the amount of fabric that you really need. You don't want to have to go buy extra yardage every time just because you want to put pattern pieces on there however which way you want. Very important to use the cutting layout. It's there for a reason. So it says for the 45-inch fabric, I am going to have the fold down here and then the selvages up here. So if you remember, the selvages are that pre-finished edge. It's where that was up on the loom, where it was cut off, and this edge is not fraying. It might be a little bit fuzzy, but it's not fraying, it's not going anywhere. It is not the cut edge where the nice person at the fabric store cut this off the bolt for you. You'll find a cut edge on either end of your fabric piece, but going down the other two ends are the selvages, and you want those selvages together so that your fold is going to be on one side, your selvages are going to be matched and lined up on the other side, and then you've got your length of fabric going down the table. Okay, so we have selvages, we have fold. This is exactly how I have it in my layout. And we are going to take a look at the first piece on here. So you kind of pick an end to work with, however you've got your fabric laid out on the table. So for me, I'm going to start on this end of my fabric because that's the end. I don't want to start over here because this is where I have my excess fabric rolled up for the rest of the pieces. So I'm starting over on this end, and I'm going to start with this big piece over in the corner because that one's going to be the easiest. And this is number 10 if you're following along with this pattern. So I'm going to look for number 10, and it's going to lay on the fold. I know this because I can see the arrow markings that tell me it is going to lay on the fold. And this is the piece that we already marked. So you can see right down at the bottom there, the large double arrow that points to that one solid line, which means to place it on the fold. It also tells us this is center fold because this is our front. This is our center front. So we are going to place this on the fold. Now, I have this excess paper on here. That's okay because I can pretty much see through the tissue paper and I can feel it. Now that straight line, that solid line right there, has to be on the fold. It cannot be inside the fold. It cannot be hanging over the fold. That line has to be on the fold, okay? So I'm going to have it lined up on there. There it is. I think that looks really nice. It's hanging off the table a little bit. I need to adjust that. There we go. And that's going to give me a little more mobility with this. So I want it as close, I want it as close to this cut edge as I can without coming off of it because I want to maximize the use of this fabric. I don't want to run out of fabric. So I'm going to check on here and make sure that both layers, the top layer and the bottom layer that I can't see, I'm going to make sure that my pattern is not going past that edge. So it looks really good. So I've got this corner lined up, so I'm just going to start right here. I'm going to take my pin, and your pins are going to go parallel to your cutting lines. And you want to go just inside that cutting line. You don't want to go outside your line because once you get it all cut out, it's all going to fall apart. The pattern is not going to stay on your fabric and you're not going to know where to mark. So it's going to be just inside the cutting line, and you want it close to the line, but not over it, because you're not going to want to hit it with your scissors or have to move it once you get to that point with your scissors. So since this is on the fold, I'm not cutting this. The reason why it's on the fold is because it is the center front. So the pattern piece is half of a piece. We'll just use this as an example. Here we go. So you can tell this is only half of a person, pretty much. So it's just going to go on this half. Now, if this were our center front piece and we're doing it on the fold, the other half is going to unfold, completely attached, and then you're going to have both sides covered. So do not cut the fold line if it is meant to be placed on the fold. So I'm going to go down the line, making sure that that line is not shifting. I'm going to place another pin about halfway down. Now you don't need a lot of pins on this side since we're not cutting it. We just need enough to keep it in place. Now if you're using a little bit more slippery fabric, there's a chance that the fabric might kind of drift this direction, which is going to create a wobbly center fold line. So as you're going along, try to keep the pattern piece smoothed out. Keep it nice and straight and smooth. And that line is going to be a lot more true, a lot more distinct than your center fold line, especially with more slippery fabric. So you might need to adjust your fabric up a little bit to meet that line. Okay, so that looks good. So I can place another pin right down here at the end. And there it is. Okay, so you can see that I've been smoothing this out the whole time. I'm not shifting things around, I'm smoothing it out, because if you have wrinkles, you have things bunched up, it's not going to be true to size. It's going to create fit issues. So I'm going to keep that fabric nice and smooth. There it is. Okay, now I'm going to finish pinning it, and I need to remember where my line is, and that's why I marked it. Another easy thing, so you don't have to go looking for your number each time, and oh yeah, am I at the waistline? Do I need a new number now? We've already marked it. So you just look for that pretty color you used. So I see my color right there. I'm going to pin this here. Again, close to that line, but not over it. So I'm not going to be hitting it with my scissors. Now you can see that I am holding the pattern and the fabric down while I pin this. And that's because most of the time with beginners, you really want to try and lift this up to get that pin under. But actually what that does is that ends up leaving it bunched. So instead, you want to keep it as smooth and even as possible. And there it is. So we're going to hold this down, hold it in place while we push the pin in. Just nice and easy, you don't have to stack the table. Slide it on under. And then where it's going to come up, and you can kind of feel it, and after you've been doing this a while, you get an instinct about it. But you can kind of feel it with your finger. Press your finger down so you can use your fingernail as kind of a guide for it. So when that pin comes back up out of the fabric, it's going to hit that nail. You can also use a thimble. But I've got really strong, thick nails. I like to use them, and I can't stand thimbles. I just can't use them. So whichever works for you. But try and make that technique work for you. Otherwise, find a technique that's similar, that's still going to keep that fabric and pattern in place while you're pinning, but is not going to damage your fingers in any way. So I'm just going to pin this out really quick, give you a few little tips and pointers along the way. You can see the amount of pins that I'm using. I'm not using a ton. It's every, I would say, 6 inches is a pretty good standard for just a regular medium weight fabric. If it's really slippery, you're going to need a few more pins. But be careful you're not using too many, because if you use too many pins, then it's going to make things bunch up a little bit more. You'll find if you're working with thicker fabrics like a fleece, you want to use as few pins as possible. In fact, if you can use pattern weights instead of pins and a rotary cutter, that would be even better. Because if you've ever pinned fleece or something like it, you know that as soon as you put a pin in there, it bunches everything together. And that's just because it's so thick. the fabric actually has to bend to follow the line of that pin. So you can see here, I've got a pretty good distance between here. That's because this fabric is so stable. It's not incredibly thick, but it's not really slippery. It's not going to be sliding all over the place as my scissors go through it. So I don't really need that many pins. So here there's about probably 10 inches between the pins, and that's okay. And the more you work with it, you're going to get your own groove. You're going to get a good feel for the fabric that you're using and the amount of pins that you're going to need. And as you're cutting, if you feel things sliding around on you, that's okay. Pause, stick in a few more pins, readjust a few things, as long as it's not too much, as long as you're not shifting things out of place. And then you're good to go. Okay, so I'm making sure to have a pin in every corner if possible. So here I have a corner. Over here you can see on that shoulder there are corners. So pin in each corner to hold it down. And if it gets a little curvy, you want pins a little bit closer together in the curves because your scissors have an easier time with smooth, straight lines than they do with curves. If you're twisting your scissors around the curves, it's going to pull things, it's going to bunch things a little bit more, or have that tendency to do that. So you should pin a little bit more in the curves, just like you would with the corners. So I've got pins in the corners, I've got them around the curves here. I might want an extra pin here, but for now I think it's okay. So I've pinned it on the fold. I'm just going to double check, make sure I'm within all of my lines, even my new custom pattern lines, and everything looks great. So I am ready to move on to the next pattern piece. Now you don't pin and then cut each individual piece. What you want to do is pin as much on here as possible first and then cut it. So the next piece on here, so we've done the piece that goes on the fold. And then we're going to be filling up this space right above it because we want to fill all of this space, pin all of these patterns on before we start cutting. So I'm going to pin all these little pieces and then this large piece and then that little piece again, and then I'm done with that layout. I can move on to the next layout, which on this pattern is for contrast. It's just 2 extra pieces. Not a lot of pieces with this one. I'm not going to make you sit through here and watch me pin on every single piece, so don't worry. But I do need to show you a couple of pieces that might have something a little bit different than other pieces, something that you're going to need a little extra help with. So I'm going to get these smaller pieces on here. Now again, we're just going to pretend that I have marked with my marker the custom pattern lines for me, whether it's following the original line for my size or it's making new lines like we did on here. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at my layout here, and it says number 6 is going to go on this edge. So I'm going to find my number 6, and there it is. Okay, now you can see on this piece there is a line with arrows on either end. This is your grain line. This needs to be parallel with your selvages. It is following your grain line, your lengthwise grain, straight of the grain, whichever term you're going to read or see or use, that is the line that it is referring to. Now, if you remember, there is another grain line in a woven fabric called the crosswise grain. There are several other terms for it. We'll just call it the crosswise grain. So there's our lengthwise grain and our crosswise grain. Now that lengthwise grain is your strongest grain. That's why we line up our pieces with that lengthwise grain, parallel with our selvages. If we don't do that and we line it up with the crosswise or on the bias or just any way we can fit it on there, we're going to have a lot of problems. When we wash the garment or wear it, it's going to stretch, it's going to pull, you're going to get weird shapes off of the line that you originally put it in. So you spend all this time cutting out this fabric and sewing it together and making this beautiful dress, but if it's not on the grain line, it's going to start hanging funny and seams are going to become all lopsided, and it's going to basically ruin it. In fact, it can even break your fabric after a while, because that crosswise grain is weak. The lengthwise grain is your stronger grain. Now you are going to find patterns that have you cut things on the crosswise grain, especially for border prints. You know, that pretty print that's on one half of your fabric and you want it at the bottom of your skirt or the bottom of your dress. This is okay if you're following your pattern directions, if your fabric is not too heavy, and if there's not going to be a whole lot of wear and tear on that fabric. But again, it does need to be on the grain line, whether it's the crosswise or the lengthwise. You want it on that lengthwise unless there is a very good reason to put it on the crosswise, because it is weaker. Okay, so we're going to line this up with our lengthwise grain, and we are using this line to make sure that it is on our lengthwise grain. So now according to this, I am supposed to have it going this direction. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to place this over here. I'm actually going to find a piece that's going to have a larger line to make it a little bit easier for you, as I'm showing you in this video, to really understand the concept a little more. This one has this itty bitty short line, and it's not going to really give you the full impact of this. Okay, so this one is on the fold of the fabric. It's going to come over here. This is also something good to do, kind of a preliminary layout. You're just going to kind of place your pieces where they're supposed to go according to your cutting layout. And then you can kind of modify from there. If you see, oh, well, this one can scoot over a little bit this way, you know, and conserve even more fabric, which is always fun. Okay, so number 8. Okay, number 8 is perfect. It's going to work just fine for this demonstration. Okay, so this is supposed to come over here. Now, here is our grain line right there, okay? This piece would be a little bit tricky to line up anyway, being so curved. It's hard to tell if it's in line. So this is going to be a really great example for how you're going to line it up with your grain line. So you're going to lay it as close as possible to your selvages. You're going to try and just kind of eye it at first. Get it as close to that edge as you can without going over. Check your bottom layer of fabric. Make sure it's not over there. And so I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to grab my measuring tape. Sorry about that. I was very proud of myself for having everything prepared except for one of the most important tools of the trade, the measuring tape. Okay, now that we're ready, we're going to take our measuring tape and we are going to place the edge, or what I like to do a lot is use that 1-inch mark, because it's got that nice solid line that goes all the way across. You can see it from either side of the tape. Makes it really easy to tell if you're on that line. So I'm going to place it on one end of the line, and I'm going to bring it down to my selvage edge. And I'm going to find a good place to mark it. Now, I'm going to grab the camera. I'm going to bring you over here so that you get a really good look at this. And we'll line it up again. I hope no one gets motion sickness. If you do, you can always close your eyes. Okay. And there you are. Now, right up close and personal here, you can see exactly how we're going to be lining this up. So I am placing my 1-inch line because I like to be able to see that line going straight through that 1 inch. There it is. You can see that I can see it lining up on either side of that tape there. Now we are going to pull this down to the selvage edge. Now you're going to find a good reference point on the selvage. So there's a line right where the fuzz starts. There are also other lines that you can see on your selvage edge. There's a line here, there's a line right here. Sometimes there's a line of dots where it was on the hooks on the loom. Find a good reference point that you can tell is continuing evenly all the way down the selvage. Okay? So I'm going to use the line that starts right before the fuzz because it's hitting a nice point on my measuring tape. It's going to make it nice and easy for me. So that is 3 1/4. Really nice and easy. Now what I'm doing is I can either hold it in place, or you take your pin, you're going to put it in through the pattern and through the fabric all the way down, but you're not going to come back up yet. You're just going to leave it down so it makes a nice pivot point if we need to adjust this. You're going to hold that in place right there, and you're going to line it up on the other side of the line so that we know that this line is even all the way across. So we're holding it in place, we're not letting anything shift. Now we're going to bring the tape down again, and it is off by almost 1/8 of an inch. So if I hold this in place, I'm going to try and keep my measuring tape in place too. This whole thing's a juggling act, but you'll get the hang of it. And shift it down just that much until my lines are now lined up. So I'm going to just hold this in place and double check that this line is still in place, and it is. It's still that 3 1/4. So now I can put another pin through here. It's a little bit easier than trying to get that other one back through again. There it goes. Okay, so now I've got my pin in there. Now I know that this pattern piece is lined up with the grain line. Okay, and then once I have it in place, I'm just going to pin. Oh, nice close-up of my fingers there. Okay, I'm going to finish pinning all the way around. And once you have it pinned securely, so you know that it's not going to be shifting off of the grain line again, you can take this pin out. It's unnecessary and it's just going to waste your pins, so you may as well take it out and put it somewhere useful. Like this curve right over here, I can use that pin. And there it is. Okay, so I am going to put you back where you started. Here we go again. I'll get the hang of it one of these days. That looks much better. Okay. So, let's go ahead and hit the highlights of lining up our grain line again. So you're going to find that line with the arrows. It's going to be double arrows, or it's going to be a single arrow. Let me see if I can find you a good example. Not on these pattern pieces. Okay. Something you should know, however, it's really good information to know. If you have a grain line that has a line with just a single arrow, either pointing up or down, doesn't matter, but a single directional arrow for your grain line, that means if you're working with a fabric that is unidirectional, like a print that is all one direction, it's not a random print where if you, like stripes or something, you need it lined up. Or you're working with something with nap, or pile, like a velvet, a corduroy, something like that. You're going to need it all going the right direction. Now you're going to have instructions that will say with or without nap. Follow those, of course, but another great double check is to look at that grain line and find the directional arrow on the grain line on your pattern piece and make sure that all of your arrows are pointing in the same direction. That's going to make sure that all those unidirectional things like nap, pile, and your print, your unidirectional prints, are all going to be going in the right direction. Okay. Now on this pattern, it has double arrows, so it doesn't matter. You're just going to have to follow the directions for with or without nap. Okay. So on here, right. So what you would do is you go to one end of the arrow and just go to opposite ends. It doesn't matter how long or short it is, but the reason you do this is to give you the maximum amount of assurance that that entire line is level with your selvage edge. So use either the tip of your measuring tape or you can use the 1-inch line. Whichever line on here is easiest for you to line it up. It doesn't really matter because we're not measuring with this. We're leveling. We're lining it up. So we're going to find that mark on there, but make sure that you know which line it is so that when you go to the other side of the line, you're not picking different marks. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to pick our line on here. I'm using the 1-inch line. We're going to one end of the arrow of our grain line. We're bringing it down to that selvage edge. We're picking a point on our selvage that is even and evenly continues through the selvage. So don't pick a line on the selvage that's wavy and is not consistent throughout it. Take a look, find a line that you know is nice and straight throughout your selvage. Pick that point and make a mental note. Or I have people who stick a pin through their measuring tape like this, because that measuring tape is cloth. So you can put a pin right there at that mark. Makes it easy. You can use your chalk. You can use however you feel comfortable with that so that you're not going to lose that line. So you're going to measure down. You're going to find that point. You're going to remember it or mark it some way. There it is. You're going to put a pin through that pattern, through that fabric, just once. You're not going to pull it back up because we don't need it secured yet. We just need it to stay in place. So we're going to put a finger right there on that pin so it's not shifting anywhere, but we're going to make sure it's smooth. We don't want it to shift, but it does have to be smooth. So just light, gentle touch. You come over to the other side of your line, and it's the same routine. You find that same point on the measuring tape, 1-inch line, tip, whatever you're using. You come down, and you need that measuring tape to line up with your selvage at the same points. It all has to match. It all has to line up the same way. Now, if it's off, remember, this is your pivot point, that pin. You put your finger right on there, so nothing's shifting. You pivot it down or pivot it up, whichever way it has to go. So you're going to shift it, but this point needs to stay right where it's at. So once you've got it in place, then you would put a pin again through that line, and this time you can come back up to secure it. Now the only thing with that, the only time I would make the exception would be if it was way off. I had to adjust it more than ½ inch to 1 inch. Then I would want to make sure that both of my lines are still in line. The more you have to adjust it on one end, then you're probably going to have to adjust it again on the other side. So once you've pivoted down, let's say it's been a lot, then we're going to hold this side while we come back over, remeasure, make sure. So you're just going to measure each side again and again until you've got it lined up. Now it sounds like a whole big long process right now. It's really not. It's actually going to become really routine, and after a while, you're going to be able to eye it. You're going to be within that 1/8 of an inch, just like I was on this piece. Most of the time, I can get it dead on, which is wonderful. But as you work with it, you're going to get a lot more comfortable with it, just like a lot of these things that you're going to be learning here in this class. So if you have any issues with this, any questions, any concerns, you're just not getting it, let me know. Give me a call, send me an email, go through my website, templesewing.weebly.com, get on the contact form, send me a message, or talk to me in class. I will be more than happy to go over this concept with you in a manner that is going to work for you if this video is not quite the right format for you to learn with. So the reason I am going over this grain line information so much, I'm repeating myself several times, is because this is very, very important. It is vitally important to the success of your sewing project that everything is lined up on that grain line. I cannot tell you how many times I have had to help someone with a failed project. The seams are all askew and things are drooping and draping and the fabric is just falling apart. And it all goes back to when it was pinned on the fabric, they just slapped it on, they did not line it up dead on that grain line, okay? Very, very important. Probably the most important thing you're gonna do when you're lining things up. Now, some of you might have noticed we did not line this up with our selvage in the manner that I showed you with this grain line. The reason is we made sure when we laid out this fabric that these selvage edges were already lined up. They were already even. So that means that directly across, directly parallel from this nice straight selvage edge, which is our length of our grain, it's already lined up with the fold. And the fold is what we followed for this piece. Therefore, putting that line on the fold is already lining it up with the selvage. How easy is that? I wish I could do every piece on the fold, but certainly save a lot of time. So I think that's covered all of your most important basics. Again, if you have any issues, any questions, you can give me a call, 877-277-2313. Send me an email, get on my website. Talk to me in class, however works for you. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope I didn't take too long. I know I like to ramble. And I look forward to seeing you in class.